When talking about video games, there's an assertion that's becoming increasingly common, so much so that I've seen a lot of people get outright annoyed by it. It's the idea that such and such game is perfect for Switch. I mean, go anywhere and say that a game is perfect for Switch, and I promise you'll get at least 1 or 2 people saying, "Would you stop saying that?" Unfortunately for those people, though, this assertion isn't going anywhere anytime soon. See, up until now, most game systems have just been game systems. Some unique features sprinkled here and there, but for the most part, you're just talking about little boxes that play video games. A person saying, "This game would be perfect on Xbox One," isn't really saying much. They're either saying, "I have an Xbox One, therefore if this game was on Xbox One, it would be perfect for me," or they're saying, "There are people who own Xbox Ones and people like to play video games, so it would be perfect if those people could play this video game on their Xbox Ones." Now, the Wii certainly did offer a unique enough playstyle to get people going on the X game is perfect for X system conversation. If it had a character swinging something around, whether it was a sword or a tennis racket or a wand or a pool noodle, it was something we wanted to see on our Wiis, at least early on when the novelty was still fresh and we were all going crazy for it. As I've said though, specifically in my video, the Switch's unique opportunity card in the corner, the Switch presents us with, well, a unique opportunity. Handheld play has never been more perfect. We've never had a portable gaming device capable of handling games this big and amazing. So now that we've got such power in our own 2 hands, naturally, we're eager to play both new games and old on the go. More than perhaps any system before it, the Switch makes us look at potential games in a new way. We're ravenous for ones that we can play in bed, or on the bus, or in the doctor's office, or in more private locations that I will not describe here. But the big question I want to talk about today is, what exactly does make a game perfect for Switch? What's the magic formula that makes the difference between a game that works on Switch and one that really works on Switch? Well, I'm gonna tell you. First, we might as well address this. Technically, one could make the argument that every game is perfect for the Switch. I mean, is there a game out there that can be played with a traditional controller setup that wouldn't benefit from being playable on the go? It's like I already said, that's a great perk no matter how you look at it. That's why the Switch is the greatest little port machine ever. But that kind of distracts from the point I want to make. I want to talk about the specific elements that make a game particularly perfect for the Switch. I touched on the subject a little in my 7 ports I want on Switch video. Wow, only a few minutes in and that's 2 plugs already. Nice. But let's get into more detail so that when we say, "This game is perfect for Switch," and someone else is like, "What does that even mean?" we can fill them in. Ever since handheld play became a thing, there's been one main idea that defines the handheld experience: playing in short bursts. The ability to turn on a game, play it for a short while, then easily turn it off again. This is the foundation upon which much of successful handheld gaming has been built. Forgive me if this is something of an oversimplification, but just look at the great success of the 3DS versus the failure of the PlayStation Vita. There are a lot of reasons the Vita failed, but it seems like one big one is that Sony focused so much on raw power that their biggest games for the system were just lesser versions of what you could get on their home consoles. The 3DS, on the other hand, still maintained that handheld identity. It gave us lots of games that were easy to drop in and out of. Pokemon and Animal Crossing, which are slow-paced and don't have a lot of action that requires quick reactions or extended play sessions. Smash Brothers and Mario Kart, where you can drop in for one fight or one race whenever you want. Mario games with short little levels that you can run through in a few minutes. Don't get me wrong, the 3DS had plenty of action-heavy games that were better suited for longer play sessions and also more graphically intensive. Monster Hunter was huge on the system, and in addition to the more handheld-friendly top-down gameplay of Link Between Worlds and Triforce Heroes, we also got the much more grand and ambitious N64 Zelda remasters. I'd be a hypocrite if I said that home console-style games in portable form weren't awesome. That's what we've been talking about with the Switch since forever. Those options were awesome to have on the 3DS, but more than anything, Nintendo stuck to that handheld legacy with the system, and it really paid off. You could even argue that in some cases they stuck to it too closely. Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, for instance, was definitely a fun game, but when you hold its tighter mission structure up against the first game's totally open format, in ways it feels a bit like an inferior experience. I can certainly see what they were trying to do though, and I can't exactly fault them for that. That was their attempt to turn Luigi's Mansion into something that better fits handheld play. The 3DS was something of a turning point for the company's handhelds because up until that point, simpler pick up and plug-and-play games weren't created solely to fit the handheld experience from a design perspective, it was also an issue of power. It's just easier and takes a lot less hardware power to make a game like Pokémon versus something like Metroid. But the 3DS proved, again with games like Monster Hunter and the 3D Zeldas, that console-quality games on Nintendo's handhelds were now basically a thing. The 3DS was sort of hovering on that threshold, but now, of course, the Switch has kicked the door down fully. Its power has a limit, sure, but there isn't much of a limit to the types of games that you can make for the Switch. Huge, ambitious, open-world games were once one of the hardest things to achieve on anything but a home console, but look at that. Right out of the gate, Breath of the Wild showed us that even that is no longer a hurdle. The only limit now is Nintendo's imagination, and unlike the Vita, which was plenty powerful for the time, the Switch has the vast majority of Nintendo's resources going into it, with no better system to compare it to. The Switch is Nintendo right now. But now that leads us back to the question: what makes a game perfect for the Switch? We've established that drop-in, drop-out gameplay, like what we've seen a lot over the years, works well on a handheld, but we've also reached a point where games are no longer limited by handheld hardware, so we want games that are bigger, grander. I don't want every franchise to go the route of Luigi's Mansion, where big experiences are simplified and broken up into little chunks to make them easier to digest. In fact, when the Switch was first announced, I was a little afraid of just that. I was worried that Nintendo would apply their handheld philosophy to everything, because the Switch was half handheld, and that we would end up with lesser versions of every single one of Nintendo's franchises. I mean, I stayed up many a night thinking about such a scenario. It terrified me. Nintendo, however, knew what they were doing, and if you want to see what makes a game a perfect fit for the Switch, you only have to look as far as the system's two flagship titles. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the most humongous and ambitious Zelda by a wide margin, and Super Mario Odyssey, the long-awaited return to 3D Mario's sandbox roots. On the surface, these games look like they're the least suited for the Switch. I mean, they're so huge and open. Wouldn't a more linear Zelda like Skyward Sword make more sense? Or a Mario that's split into individual levels like Super Mario Galaxy or 3D World? I thought that once, and then I played Breath of the Wild and Odyssey and saw that they set the new standard for handheld play. And that standard is big experiences that are broken up into smaller parts, but not broken up like a mission or a level-based game. Nothing interrupts you and puts you back at a world map or something when you complete a challenge. The micro experiences of Zelda and Mario can be experienced one at a time or in long sequences. How far you go and how much you do is always up to you. Ergo, the player drives the experience forward at their own pace. That's the key here. I don't know about you, but in other Zelda games, I always complete each dungeon in one sitting. It's just too hard to pause the game and jump back in later and try to figure out where I am or what I'm supposed to do. While I do wish that Breath of the Wild's Divine Beasts were bigger and acted as more substantial dungeons, I adore what the developers did with the shrines. It rarely takes too long to get through a shrine, so you're rarely stuck doing one and unable to move on to something else until you beat it. And the whole game is built like this. You can hop in and do one shrine, or beat one camp of enemies, or find one Korok and stop again. You're never required to engage with the game for too long, but it still doesn't feel like a shallow game, because if you so desire, all these mini and micro experiences can be strung together seamlessly. Odyssey, same thing. Instead of a long series of levels, each of which must be completed fully before you can move on to the next one, you've got hundreds and hundreds of individual moons to collect in big open areas. Some of them are hidden in slightly longer platforming levels, and some are just sitting around waiting for you to come by and earn them by doing any number of things. You rarely launch into something that you absolutely have to finish, or else you'll lose progress or forget what you were doing and lose your bearings. This new format is the answer to our question. This is how we can get games, console quality games, that aren't lacking in scope and ambition, yet are still perfect for playing for any amount of time, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours. It's almost more perfect than I could have imagined. It makes for home console experiences that are even better than they were before, in my opinion, and somehow even makes for handheld experiences that are more convenient than they were before. If I turn off my game in the middle of an older Mario level, I'm gonna lose my progress. If I'm trying to get a moon basically anywhere in Odyssey, I can turn it off and come back later and be exactly where I left off. Now, that's not to say that every single game has to follow this format exactly, this thing of having hundreds of individual tasks to accomplish. Like I said, really what it boils down to is progress being fueled by the player, not the game. A game is easier to turn off when it doesn't force you to do a lot at a go. Even a game with frequent saves and checkpoints can still be hard to put down if you'll be at a mental disadvantage by quitting it for a while. If instead of being free to do what you want when you want, the only thing to do is keep going forward. Sometimes even games that appear on the surface to be better suited for handheld play can come with disadvantages. The previously mentioned Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, in a way I can understand that individual missions make sense. You jump in, do a mission, and you can be done if you want. But at the same time, you can't quit in the middle of one, so sometimes you can be kind of stuck with your 3DS hanging on that one game until you can finish. Mario & Rabbids, same thing. In a way, it's a terrific handheld experience. It's a tactics game, so you don't have to worry about reaction time. You can always take as long as you want to plan out your next move. Again, turn-based gameplay was one of the things that made Pokémon such a successful handheld game. But then again, battles can last quite a while, and you can't exactly quit halfway through one, and even further, you can't exit out to the hub without completing all the battles in a chapter. So that makes it harder to switch to a different game. Handheld perfectness can be a bit of a delicate thing. There are a lot of elements that can shift that perfectness one way or another. And of course, there are other qualities that can make a game better suited for handheld play, and some of them come down to personal taste. Here's a big one for me. If a game is multi-platform, looks prettier on the other systems, and isn't very long, I'd rather not get it on my Switch. Take Little Nightmares, for example. It's a side-scroller, which is the sort of thing that's normally really ideal for handheld systems. But the game can be beaten in 1 or 2 sittings, so if I'm gonna play it, why not just schedule time to play it on my PS4 so I can enjoy the better graphics while I'm at it? Then when I'm done and I've enjoyed that initial moody, atmospheric experience, I'm probably just done. My Switch is better suited for games that I want to return to again and again, or games that are short but don't lose anything by being on the Switch. There are in fact lots of games I can think of that I really want to play, but that I just wouldn't see any reason to play on my Switch if they were ported over. Like Uncharted 4. I know Uncharted 4 is a Sony IP and there's literally no chance of it being ported over, it's just an example. It's so linear and action heavy that I'd rather just plop down in front of my TV and enjoy the ride. Taking little bites out of an experience like that is just not very satisfying. Really, any linear action heavy game is the same way. Call of Duty definitely isn't on the list of stuff I want to play, but it's another good example of a game that doesn't necessarily fit. It would be cool to have it for the people that do want it, but I would never say that it was even close to being perfect for Switch. Alright, Arlo, Mr. Know-It-All, you seem to have a pretty specific idea of what kinds of games are and aren't perfect for the Switch, so how about you stop beating around the bush and give us some more examples of what are perfect? I don't think I like your tone, but I'll do it anyway. Well, for starters, there's that Skyrim again. There are a few scenarios where you can get stuck and have to complete what you started, but most of the time, it's just you running around and killing guys and doing whatever you want, when you want. Even finding yourself deep within a dungeon or a cave isn't a big deal. Most of them are pretty linear, so it's not like you're gonna lose track of what you were supposed to be doing unless there's some deeper quest element or something. And worst case scenario, you just leave. Most dungeons have the same junk in them, and they all just reset after long enough anyway. Skyrim truly is perfect on the Switch, and by now we're seeing a trend with open world games. Assassin's Creed, GTA, these have got Switch written all over them. They're big and they've got lots of action, but most of it is driven by the player. You choose when to go on missions and get involved with stuff. And if you don't feel like dedicating yourself to a longer mission, just don't. Just run around and have some fun, because there's no end of stuff to just do. Then if you saw my reviews of Doom and Wolfenstein 2, you'll know that I think they're pretty darn good examples of games going one way or the other. Doom's crazy action and beautiful graphics do benefit from beefier hardware, but at the same time it features these big huge maps that are stuffed with secrets. Plus the action is broken up into bits. You come upon one grisly fight after another, but once you beat a batch of baddies, the area generally becomes safer for backtracking. The result is an experience that's perfect for working through at your leisure. Not every level is like this, mind you, but an awful lot of them are. Thus, a game that works really, really well on Switch. But then Wolfenstein has a way more linear mission structure. There are secrets, and you can return to areas you've cleared after a certain point in the game, but for the most part, these maps are straight shots to the end. I enjoyed the heck out of the game, but I ended up wishing I had just given it a few days on my PS4 instead and enjoyed the prettier graphics and higher frame rate. Resident Evil, now there's a series that works well in handheld form. I adore Revelations 2 on my Switch. The campaign is linear, but it's also broken into chapters, so it sort of straddles the line. The raid mode, though, is one of the best things to happen to handheld video gaming, period. A billion trillion missions to do, with all sorts of gun parts to find, and characters to level up, and abilities to unlock. Then RE7, I know I've talked about that one about 1,000 times on my channel already, but good golly gosh, it would just be so perfect for the Switch. Open format, lots of exploration, everything is pretty slow with save rooms everywhere. I would be in heaven. Oh man, then you got Hyrule Warriors. What can I even say about that one? It's the most wonderfully mindless, grindiest game with such an absurd number of adventure mode maps to slowly chip away at. That's a game that was fine on Wii U, but just comes alive in handheld form, especially when held up against the technically limited 3DS version. If you want one single prime example of a game that just works on Switch, Hyrule Warriors is it. I know I've mostly covered first parties and big budget AAA titles, but that's because the list of Switch perfect indie games is just too staggering to even begin to touch on. There are plenty of games on the eShop that aren't really made better by being on the system. Story heavy games that you'll probably only play through once, really short games, anything that requires a lot of dedicated time at a stretch. But then there are countless games that work perfectly, many for the reasons we've discussed and many for the more traditional handheld reasons. Platformers and dungeon crawly roguelikes and puzzle games and RPGs and arcadey multiplayer stuff more than you can just shake a stick at. In fact, local multiplayer is a really big deal that I didn't even touch on. Anything that lets you just hand a Joy-Con to a friend for instant two-player, that's huge. I could probably even dedicate a whole section of this video to the concept and how it also makes for Switch perfect experiences. But you know what, I'm tired. I think you get the idea. Local multiplayer plus Switch, it's a good one. Let's recap. What, my friends, are some of the qualities that make a game extra awesome on the Switch? As with handheld experiences of days past, the ability to play in short bursts. Even further though, the ability to progress at your own pace, whether it's because of missions, matches, etc., or because the game can otherwise be easily broken up into small individual experiences. Then to complement that style, being large and or having lots of content to work through over time is a huge plus. That's what gets you returning again and again. And just to be safe, let's throw in local multiplayer. It doesn't necessarily tie in with the other qualities we've talked about, but it's still something that can matter a lot. It's why Smash Bros. Ultimate is truly going to be the ultimate Smash Bros. It's important to reiterate one last time before we wrap this up that every game works on the Switch. Just because a game isn't a perfect fit doesn't mean it doesn't belong. In the past, I myself have been frustrated by developers claiming that they weren't porting any of their games to Nintendo systems because they couldn't find a way to make them work with the unique hardware, and they weren't developing exclusives for the same reason. And it's like, no, dude, your game doesn't need to use Waggle or two screens or whatever. Putting a good game on a Nintendo system is a good reason to put a good game on a Nintendo system. So don't think even for a second that I'm somehow against certain games coming over. And I certainly know that not everyone has a PS4 or an Xbox One or a PC to fall back on with some of these titles. For many of you, your Switch is your only system right now, and for that reason, every game possible is welcome, even ones that don't necessarily fit perfectly. But when I say that a game is perfect for the Switch, that, my friends, is what I mean. If a game runs well, we're all happy to have it on our little system. The more most certainly is, the merrier. But some games stand out in terms of how depressingly addictive they are, how many hours you can dump into them over the course of weeks and even months with frightening ease. There are games that you play and you're like, cool, I played that game, that was good. And then there are games where you're like, 200 hours, I haven't even beaten the main story yet. There are good games on the Switch, and there are good games for the Switch. What about you? What qualities do you think make for perfect handheld play? What games would you love to have on the go more than anything in the world? And most importantly, what's your favorite pizza topping? And no topping shaming, this is a positive, open discussion. I'm talking to you pineapple haters. See you later!